Good evening. Once again, this is Brainstorms. I'm Jack Jersowitz of the Workers' Revolutionary League. And given that the row goes on, we'll pick the phone up in a minute, that the continual paean goes on about ending the violence in society goes on, I thought we'd continue our discussion on the violence in society and how and where it emanates from and how to stop it. And what always amazes me is how the most violent folks in society, that is the government itself, those people who send smart bombs down into shelters with women and children, those people who don't mind killing thousands of people running and fleeing along the road, those of you who have been around as long as the Vietnamese War, of course, remember perhaps the most famous photograph coming out of the Vietnamese War, that of a young child, a young female child, nude and burned, running down the highway away from the napalm that the U.S. government so kindly dropped in order to liberate her. That's the core and the center of violence in this society. And those folks, like Mayor Campbell and his police, who propose to clamp down on the so-called gangs, are proposing to clamp down on what they understand is the opposite of the violence of the government, although it is misdirected and undirected, and simply at this point a cry against what the government brings or doesn't bring that human beings need: jobs, places to live, so on and so forth. That is, they intend and they say they're going to clamp down on the so-called gangs in the society against what is essentially revolutionary violence, although it's revolutionary violence that is not controlled by revolutionary thought, by revolutionary theory. It's simply a rebellion against a thoroughly rotten government and the conditions of life that that government are making worse and worse and worse all the time. You don't have to look very far, especially if you happen to be a city worker, to know that Bill Campbell and his crew, while they're making a whole bunch of people rich, or trying to anyway, are making city workers poorer by refusing to give them raises, by making them pay more for their health care, things that were once given free. They are taking away from city workers, both by freezing their wages, by increasing the cost of health care, so on and so forth. And they are throwing more and more people down to the bottom of the stack. And if their children, their young people, rebel, and rebel, unfortunately, because they don't know what to do otherwise, that is, how to rebel successfully, how to prepare for a situation where we can change society, then that's the way it is. And every time that Campbell and company or the government talk about clamping down on the gang violence, they're talking about opposing the rebellious youth, the revolutionary youth of the city. And it's, I think, high time that we began to put an end to the violence that's just happening helter-skelter out there. Interesting word I just came up with, helter-skelter, for those of you that know some of your criminal history. That violence that's happening because of the outrage that young people feel and their failure to understand how to go forward, how to develop their anger progressively, that has to be harnessed, and it has to be harnessed in a revolutionary movement. So I want to say this. We've tried in the last week or two to get some of these so-called gang people, especially the folks people in here, to have them sit here and talk and tell the truth, not the way they allegedly are invited to tell the truth in some of these very well managed and controlled meetings that government and other people put on. Come in here and tell the truth. They don't have to identify themselves. They can sit here and not be identifiable on camera. We can even distort their voices. If any of you are listening out there who belong to these gangs, so-called gangs, if you know people in them, we want to meet some of these people. We want to bring them in here to talk about this problem and how we can solve it. My number will come up on that screen somewhere along the way. 627-1887 is my personal home phone number. If I'm not there, leave me a message. 627-1887. It ain't up the screen, by the way. You got to hit the number and enter. There you go. You got it. 627-1887. But we want to talk to people. We'll take calls now. And we hope you're going to talk about the subject. Yes, go ahead, please.
I like your new table, Jack. You said I finally sold that old piece of shit.
Now, that's rebellious youth, but the ones that want things to stay the way they are. And in order to avoid it, sit around at home and get drunk and do that kind of thing. What are you going to say? We say it every week. It's the middle class. Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you wanted to buy a Lollapalooza ticket for Saturday.
When the season starts again, I ought to tell everybody, this is the last show of this season. When we come back up, we will have caller ID, and we just may identify you right out here in the open. Yes, go ahead, please.
I'm sorry to hear it's your last show, but I love my table.
We'll wait for the serious calls. They're out there. Yes, go ahead, please.
Can't get me, honey. I got color block.
Well, there's a way through that, too. Technology is a marvelous toy. Yes, go ahead, please.
Who bought your table, Jack?
Nobody bought it. Yes, go ahead, please.
Where'd it go? I want to know where it went. Where did it go? Tell me.
I think all we've got out there... No, I know better. That's not all we got out there tonight.
We're the only ones watching the show, Jack.
If you're the only ones watching the show, I wouldn't be here. Yes, go ahead, please.
Somebody else is watching the show, Jack, and, I don't know, I've watched you several times, and I'm just completely kind of perplexed as to why you think that, communism is, so great. I mean, I've read Marx, I'm a political science major, I've read Che Guevara, I've read all that stuff, and I just don't see it.
Well, let's get straight. Che Guevara is not, first of all, a Marxist.
Well, he's a revolutionary.
Well, but there's a difference between revolutionary and revolutionary in the terms of Marxism. Secondly, if communism wasn't a workable, viable system, you'd have to explain how come we're all here, because for 3.5 million years, humankind lived in communal societies, if you know your history.
Well, sure they did, Jack. I mean, if this whole world was, Gilligan's Island, well, sure, it worked fantastic. I could trade, coconut cakes for, pineapples, but that's just not how it works, Jack. I mean, it's really sort of asinine because in your whole communist thing, it has to be run by some sort of, authoritarian, entity.
Just shows that you have not read.
No, Jack,
you have not read the literature of Marxism. It's very obvious.
Marx, Engels, I read Trotsky, all those theories on permanent revolution. I mean,
well, where do you get the idea then that it has to be run by an authority?
Well, so it's going to be run by all of the workers, right?
It's going to be run by the population itself. There will no longer be any classes. I mean, you know the expression. If you read the literature, you know the expression, the withering away of the state.
Sure, and you honestly think that this is a workable alternative? That this
well,
is in our
question. It isn't a question of a workable alternative. Also, if you've read the literature, you understand that we do not live in stasis. That mankind has never lived in stasis. That yes, the opening stages of mankind's existence took a long time and changed very slowly, and we're talking about that first roughly 3 million years. But the period since we left hunter-gathering societies and the lowest levels of agriculture until now moved rather fast. Capitalism's only been here roughly 600 years. And you know very well, if you've read the literature, whether you agree with it or not, that these things are all in transition, that there's constant motion and constant development. Mankind's history is a history of social development, no?
Well, true. I mean,
Then
Marx,
capitalism isn't the end of the road, is it?
Right. Marx always said that you would have to get to, capitalism first, even before you could take any further steps. And so therefore, really, you should be promoting capitalism in like third world countries where it's not really capitalist,
That's precisely the point.
I don't want to tie up all of your,
It's okay.
lines.
It's okay. You can do that.
And whatnot, but it doesn't take any genius to realize that some old guy wearing suspenders on a public access channel is not going to get this stuff changed. I mean, it's
Nobody ever said that I myself am going to get this stuff changed.
It is-
Those
it-
people who are going to change it are the working class.
I mean, anybody who truly believes communism is actually going to work, might as well vote for Ozzy Osbourne to be president.
Well,
I mean, it's such a stupid pipe dream because
How do
you take incentive out of everything. Greed is what makes everything work. I mean,
Well, then how do you explain? How do you explain 3 million years where greed didn't exist?
Jack, why should I have to work my butt off so that, I can pay somebody's water bill who lives in, Carver Homes? I mean, it's just asinine, Screw him. I don't care if that guy starves. I really don't. I mean, if he's truly lazy and he's sitting there drinking Schlitz malt liquor bull and, bitching about the right
What do you
man,
do
I
for?
don't
What do
care.
you do for you just gave away a good part of your outlook. What do you do for a living?
I gotta do all kinds of things.
What do you do for a living? What do you do mainly?
I'm a member of the bourgeoisie, Jack.
Oh, you are. I knew that was your ideology. Didn't know whether you were actually functionally a member of the bourgeoisie.
I consider myself a libertarian, Jack. I want.
And a racist, of
I
course.
want. Well, I guess you can call it that, but I don't really consider myself that. I mean, there's plenty of lazy
Well,
white
you
people.
just gave us that
Jack,
handle.
Jack, I don't like rednecks either. I'm not going to be showing up at any Leonard Skinner shows. So you can jump over that whole argument because that's just dumb. I mean, it works to your advantage to immediately write me off as just racist. It's very effective, Jack, but it's just not true. It's just BS.
No.
If that's the easiest way, well,
Let's go back over this discussion. We have a situation in Eastern Europe, the old Soviet bloc, so to speak, where there was going to be a rapid change to capitalism, right? And as that change starts to take place, we of course see all of the old problems of capitalism coming up. This stockholding organization, what was it, MMM or something like that, in Russia, which is as in the tradition of the old robber barons of capitalism, of course, ripping off everybody they can and then trying to walk away with the proceeds. On the other hand, as you go along and they try to improve things by bringing about capitalism, they're throwing tens of thousands and in some places tens of millions of people out of work, closing down their plants, and that working class does not sit back and accept that. They've had massive strikes going on, not only in the Soviet bloc, but also in China, and in China, in the free enterprise zones, we begin to see the development of massive trade unions.
all right, Jack.
These are revolutionary situations, whether you agree with the outcome of it or not.
Right. Let's just pose one real quick, question here. All right. So the working class, right? So when I think of working class, I think of exactly that. Blue collar, working class.
I think of people who produce the commodities of capitalist
Well,
society.
that's everybody. Well, then Donald Trump is working class.
No, he produces no
He
commodities.
jobs.
He produces no commodities. What's he do?
Well,
He clips coupons.
Well, he produces jobs.
No, that's not a commodity.
Works in those casinos, Jack. Kangaroos? No, those are people. Who do you think's getting paid?
When I'm
People
talking, of course, about the
Yeah.
the basic commodities of existence. I'm talking about food, shelter, clothing. What's with this thing cutting in and out?
I'm not sure, but
Are you on a speakerphone?
no.
No.
No, I mean, you know, I mean, I don't want to get really, deep into it because it's pointless. But I mean,
You might come in here. You might come in here and discuss it here on the channel with me.
a relative
Get
term,
into it.
Jack. All right, poor is a relative term, right?
All of it's relative.
Now, let's say everybody in this country makes $3 million, right? Well, then the person who makes $500,000 every
Is
single
poor.
year is poor. So it's a relative term.
It's relative exactly, which is why it's a mistake to think that if the United States is a better off country than everywhere else, that this is not a revolutionary country. Because people don't function on the basis of absolutes, they function on the basis of relatives. We had somebody, a guest here, not long ago, not on the show, but a friend of mine had a guest from Senegal, a journalist, and we took her through Carver Homes, and she thought Carver Homes was paradise, you know, a public housing project, because the conditions under which people live in Senegal are awful compared to what we live under here. But the man who is living out there, or the men who are living out there, know only their own experience, and if their conditions of life become, in their own experience, intolerable compared to what they had before, you get revolutions. Isn't that the history?
Well, sure, revolutions happen all the time,
And the question is, what is the tendency and the direction of that development, you see? You know what Marxism says about that.
Sure, I mean, I've read a lot of Marx, and it does make sense. It certainly does. Anybody who reads Marx, would certainly agree with most of what Marx says. But it's whether it sounds good and whether it's applicable are two completely different things.
Well, let's look at the society in which we live here in this country. Boy, they're playing games with the switcher back there. We live in a country in which now we find people who are graduates of universities, who have major degrees, who are various skilled technicians of all sorts, not operators, but highly skilled computer people, programmers, so on and so forth, are being thrown out of work. And when they're able to find work again, instead of a salary and all the conditions that go with it, they're being hired as contract workers who have to provide everything for themselves beyond their contract. They have no security as they had previously. And many of them are being thrown out of work and turning into hamburger flippers. Now, these people are facing a world in which they cannot live as they used to. And numbers of those people are growing more and larger and larger.
Jack, I don't know whether you realize this. I don't know if you're watching a monitor there, but I can't tell whether I'm watching a public access channel or whether it's a Pink Floyd show.
I'm watching the monitor. My friends in the control room are playing around with the switcher.
Yeah.
I know what they're doing.
It's like a Grand Funk Railroad show.
Well, it's the way it goes. The conversation isn't, though, is it?
No, but
Nah, cut it out, my guys. You're going too far.
Groovy.
Going too far.
Groovy guys.
You see, we got a young punk back there, who's he's much more skilled than most of the people we have had around here on the switcher.
Do they have any iron butterfly back there, Jack? Maybe
I don't know what he's got.
Maybe you get some Inagata Davida going.
Alan, leave it alone.
Well, I'm going to have to let you go, Jack.
Good for the conversation. If you want, give me a call. You come in here and do this live on the show with me.
I'll think about it,
It's a
Jack.
valuable discussion. Obviously, you're a member of the bourgeoisie. Your outlook is subjective in that sense, and we have a disagreement as a result. But you know what I do? If you've been watching this show, I try to bring you up against what I think of the empirical data.
That is true. And you're doing a good job, Jack.
Thank you.
All right.
We'll talk to you again. We're always willing to speak with the big bourgeoisie. No problem there. Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack. To touch bases on the gang situation here in Atlanta, I don't really think a gang situation even exists in Atlanta. I think the police use this whole thing to create something in people's minds that there's gangs, but they're really focusing on something else.
That's right.
There's no gangs in Atlanta.
That's why I said so-called gangs.
Yeah, but I see on the media and the news they talk about they have a new computer system and things of this nature and all that.
Well, what they're focusing on is young people. They're afraid of young people for good cause. A good part of the violence in the city, no argument, I don't think you'll argue with me, undoubtedly is is done by young people, and there's good reason for it.
Much of this is what I notice with that is basically a lot of black-on-black crime. I wouldn't really say it's so much gang.
Well, I mean, we deal with the society here deals with this question of black-on-black crime as though it's something unique. It's not unique. You go back 100 years to New York City, where there was heavy. I guess it's 100 years or so. Heavy Irish immigration, and you had slums that were Irish slums instead of black slums or ghettos. You had Irish ghettos or Jewish ghettos.
Yeah.
I mean, if you follow the flicks, the gangster flicks, you run across a flick here and there where you got Jewish gangsters killing Jewish people around them.
Do you notice something going on? What I see going on in the black community where it's being disarmed. I mean, with the SCLC disarming people.
Well,
the ACP, they're disarming the black community.
The
I don't see them going out to Gwinnett and going out to
of course not.
Kennesaw and the buyback programs.
Oh no, in Kennesaw they made a law that you had to have a gun in your house.
So I don't understand why is there so much focus on the inner city? Because
they're afraid of young black people.
they have a lot more guns out in Kennesaw and Gwinnett and Forsyth than they do in the inner city.
You're
I mean,
right.
the guns are being mass produced outside of the urban area anyway.
You're right. What do you do?
I work at a hotel.
You work in a hotel.
Well, I'm a working person. Yes, I'm blue collar. I produce, serve, whatever you want to call it.
That's fine. That's the way you earn your bucks. I'd like to talk to you off camera sometime.
That'd be very interesting. The last individual, you mentioned something about malt liquor. Why do people always want to stereotype individuals? I have no problem. Even I may look at people who drink malt liquor, who drink beer. I mean,
he's a member of
we always focus so much on commercialism.
He's a member of the big bourgeoisie. He has no choice.
That whole thing is falling. I see those individuals jumping out of hotel windows and jumping off of skyscrapers because they failed.
You're right.
The whole thing is falling, and people don't want to accept this.
You're right, and I think that guy was honest enough to be able to recognize that, though he won't go any further with it.
It's falling, but I also see people are very selfish to accept socialism. People don't want to give. People are very selfish, so
It's not a question of changing one's mind in that direction. It's a question of what is necessary. If you can't live in the old way, then perhaps you look for another way, and the other way is in front of you. That's what's happened in the old Soviet bloc. A large part. Let's be straight about it. A large part of that working class at first thought, well, they're going to make out like the people in the United States. Of course, they've got a snapshot of the United States. They don't have a real picture of it. And some of them, were in favor of changing over. But when they saw what the changeover started to bring, they were no longer secure. They suddenly became very upset and very angry, and have begun massive demonstrations against the change.
okay. I also want to jump subject again. I noticed that the floodgates have been open. I'm looking at. To me, it seems like there's more people coming in from other countries lately. Not Vietnam, Korea, Irish, Russia. Everybody's coming into America. What's happening with this? You got the Mexicans coming up from the border.
Well, if everybody advertises the United States as the best country in the world, poor workers who can't live in other countries, who are a little bit more mobile than most of their brothers down there,
Right.
or most of our brothers, because we're all workers, we're all the same class, then they're going to try and move to where they can at least exist a little better.
In the
That's
same
natural.
time, the major corporations are moving outside of this country. They're going to Mexico. They're going everywhere else but in the country. I mean,
And what's happening in Mexico? In Mexico, you've got a growing revolutionary movement. Chiapas wasn't just a little area in one place. It started in Chiapas, but it spread throughout the country. I mean, there are major demonstrations supporting Chiapas in Mexico City.
it's like this country's it's trying to sell this bill of goods that it's land of opportunity, but in the same sense, your businesses and corporations are moving outside of this country with Nike in Korea and Mexico, and they're trying to find the cheap labor.
Cheap labor, right? And you're aware of all this. The question is, what the hell do we do about it? That's what I'd like to talk to you about.
Again, I see the masses, the general masses will be unable to. I mean, to say that this country would share its wealth, I think they would press a button. They would destroy the whole country before they would be able to give and share with other nations and people. I think they would press a button and just blow up the whole thing. Actually,
They would engage in precisely what they're engaging in.
they don't want to lose.
The use of troops wherever they can use them, the use of nuclear weapons ultimately, if they have to, is the way they'll do it.
They are
We
afraid
need
to
to
lose.
stop them.
They are afraid to lose. I think that's going to boil down to the
Well,
whole
they're
thing.
not going to give it up without a fight, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So that's the essential question then. The essential question is, how do we organize?
And I like to also
win that.
focus on, I'm a black male or whatever, but I think the real issue is not race.
You're right, it's
Well,
class.
it is, and well, this whole country was built upon the whole idea anyway. But when it boils down to it, that won't be the issue. And I think we're wasting a whole lot of time, whether I'm black or one's Caucasian or whatever, wasting a whole lot of time focusing on the issue because that's not the issue.
The issue is class.
The issue is class versus the class versus the classless in a sense.
Well, it's the working class and those who would be working class against the bourgeoisie.
Yeah,
It's the have-nots against the haves.
it's going to be a bloody battle. I see it happening every day. I see the subliminal messages that when I see commercialism and everything, what they do with that, they take the working class, they take the money, they more or less take their money, and it's wild how they use the
It all ends up in the hands of a few, doesn't it?
yeah, basically the government focusing on one thing, but they're trying to tempt and
I mean, they're even talking about a health plan which they're going to finance by taking the benefits away from some, that is reducing their benefits and making in order to pay for the others.
yeah.
I mean, that's what they're talking about when they're talking about everybody's got to pay a little bit. Instead of the free plans that many, many workers have because of the strength of their trade unions, they're proposing.
Now, all this to me ties into the New World Order. This whole thing with the disarming the public, first of all. This new thing with the smart card, with where people have to have an ID with them all times.
They'll never get there. One of their problems is that ultimately the troops they rely on come from the working class in the main. And historically, if you study revolutions, armies just go over a whole hog. When the conditions become so bad that it's obvious what's wrong, whole armies go over to the other side. And the armies are the best people to handle weapons. I'd say that to anybody out there that's worried about whether they're going to lose their gun or not with these new gun laws. Don't worry about it. The people that are really trained and have those weapons, if we do our job here as revolutionaries, will come over. They'll bring their guns with them, and we won't have any problems.
I would like to see it happen, but I see more with the 1996 Olympics coming up and other different things going here in Atlanta. I see a police state very, very soon here in Atlanta.
Well, you mustn't work just on the impression of the moment. You've got to look at the underlying crisis.
I just see it's like a stage. It's like a whole play being set up, and the causes, like there's cause and effect, and it's like it's all being set up. And I think
but
that's
the driving factor underneath all this is the crisis, the economic crisis, in which is driving the whole section, not only of the working class but of the middle class, down into the dumps where they can't live, where they can no longer exist, and they're not going to take that without a fight. That's the driving factor.
Right.
You mustn't look just at the surface. Okay?
Okay.
Thanks for calling. We appreciate your call.
Nice talking to you.
Right, bye-bye. And give me a call. Number is 627-1887. That's the call at home. Yes, go ahead, please.
How you doing?
Okay, how are you?
Oh,
You want to turn that TV down? Okay. Still there?
Eon then?
Okay. Hello? Hello? Gone, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. If you call, you got to turn your TV down. Yes, go ahead, please. Hello? Yes, go ahead, please.
Hi, you're really live. What's your story? I've watched you a couple of weeks now. Like, what is your main point?
I'm not going to go through it all. If you've been watching the show, you know what the main point is.
Just a couple of weeks. Are you a communist?
This is one of our prank callers. We're going to let you go. I mean, you guys can't really hide what you are. We humor you sometimes. Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, darling, I want to know what's going to happen to fashion, darling.
Darling, I could care less. Yes, go ahead, please.
What the hell is going to happen to fashion?
Tell you one thing, there's nothing fashionable about you. Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, what do you think about raft race coming up here in the city?
About what?
This Atlanta raft race. All the gay men coming to the city this weekend.
Hey, if they're going to have a good time, I'd like to be there with them partying. I love a good time.
You go, girl.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, what do you think about the Atlanta Ballet?
I think the Atlanta Ballet is a very good company.
And do you think that the summer camp they've been had going on lately, do you think that's good?
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Actually, the Atlanta Ballet has a group of young children who are exposed to some very fine dance instruction from very good instructors who do performances and get exposure that they wouldn't get any other way. If the Atlanta Ballet Company asks you for some money to help support them, I'd give it to them. Yes, go ahead, please.
Hey, what's up, Jay?
Yeah.
Hey, I figured I'd save you from all the crank callers.
Well, that's okay.
Okay, so what you talking about this evening?
You haven't been listening?
I haven't been listening the whole evening, no.
Well, we started out talking about the so-called gang violence in the city.
Okay, I wanted to ask you about that last week because, first of all, how do you define a gang?
I don't define them. I say so-called gangs.
Okay, yeah, because a gang is really just a bunch of people bound together for a definitive purpose.
Not necessarily. They can be just, you can see it in the queasy statements that some of the police are making who are unsure. They talk about how it almost borders over, it's almost a social group, not a violent group, is the way they describe, some of these guys are describing it, because it's just, we used to have a group of people in New York City and Brooklyn that hung out on the street corner. I guess some people could have called that a gang. We didn't have a name. There were groups that had names. They called them gangs.
Well, certainly, and almost anything else can be called a gang if there are 5 or however many
If
people.
you're interested in targeting young people, because you're afraid of them, yeah, you're going to use all the terminology you can.
Okay. Well, here's another question for you. First of all, when you talk about curbing violence, I want to see or really see how people in those positions would talk about developing a situation where violence is either lessened or redirected in a country where violence has been here almost since this country's inception. And they talked about...
It's been here a long time.
It's been here a very long time now.
Question is, whose violence?
Right, who's violent and for what purpose?
That's right.
So, in order to deal with the discussion like this one rationally, we've got to deal with violence across the board.
Well, you apparently weren't hearing my opening remarks. What I was doing was counterposing the violence of the so-called gangs, and we know there's violence out there on the street, against the violence of the state, pointing out that the violence of the so-called gangs had an element of revolutionary violence in it, because it was a reaction to the violence and horrors of the society established by the state. In that regard, the problem is to channel that anger, to direct that anger into in a revolutionary direction. I've said I'd like to speak to some of these young people on the street. I'd like them to call me at home. We'll bring them in here to the studio and let them sit here and give us their say. If they don't want to be identified, we'll take care of that as well. But I think it's about time that those of us who understand the difference between the violence of these young people on the street, some of them, these people that they're trying to preach to and tell them they shouldn't be violent, the difference between that and the violence of the state that causes that situation to begin with is a big difference.
Yeah, it's a big difference. I also don't see that violence, even though I don't totally disagree with what you said, I don't see that violence as challenging status quo at all. I think it really...
Doesn't?
I think it augments and
Think about it.
Or status.
Think about it. The simplest robbery of,
Are we talking about violent crime or are we talking about robbery?
well, robbery can be a violent crime. And robbery is usually effectuated
Well, let's talk
at the
about
point of a gun.
let's talk about violence because robbery is something else. If we're talking about violence,
Well,
we're talking about something completely.
I understand that, but somebody who goes out on the street and robs somebody's fancy car with a gun is violent, no? Or threatening violence?
I'm talking about violence meaning bodily harm or death.
I understand, but you can't separate it from the reasons it takes place. That's what I'm trying to say. And the reasons it takes place is,
I'm not separating it from the reasons that it takes place. What I'm saying is that it supports the status quo.
you say it supports the status quo. I don't think so. I think it's destructive of the status quo. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so terrified by it.
Now, I think what's terrifying to the people, particularly in Atlanta, is that they've got to get a handle on things before 1996.
Well, we're talking about the government of Atlanta, I hope.
Well, they're trying to get a handle on all this.
That's right.
Because,
But,
you know,
but then
we're
the violence is destructive of their aims of making money off the Olympics.
absolutely.
In that case, it's revolutionary violence in that part of it, in that sense.
Even though it's not intended that way.
That's right, because we're not talking here just about subjective intentions. We're talking about actualities. We're talking about what underlies what we think about it is one thing. What we think about things is not necessarily the truth of the matter. There's two sides to this question.
Well, okay, comment on what you think is going to happen between now and 1996.
It's not a question of what I think is going to happen between now and
Right,
1996.
the fact
What
that
you did was raise an interesting point, and that is they need to control if they're going to hold the Olympics. That is, they need to control in order to make money off the Olympics. And in the sense that they can't control this violence is, whose interest is it to have the Olympics here? The capitalists' interests. The guys that are going to make the bucks off the deal. And in the sense that violence runs against that, then that is the violence of young people on the streets, and that violence in that sense, in that narrow sense, please, tends in a revolutionary direction. Of course, that's not the way to solve the problem. Violence is ultimately a necessity, but not in the individual sense that it's being operated today. But they're afraid of those kids. They're afraid that that they'll stop being individually violent, that they will organize, become part of a revolutionary movement, and then when they are able to take over, they will be able to do so. That's what they're afraid of.
I don't think so. But it's been nice talking with you, Jack. It's
Well,
always a good dialogue and all the rest of that. And
okay.
hopefully I save you from some of your current callers.
Well, that's okay.
All right.
We know how to deal with them, as you know.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Something to think about. The violence that we see is not one-sided. There's two sides to it. Yes, go ahead, please.
I don't believe it. I got through.
Sure. You're through.
I've been watching you for a couple of weeks, and I just wanted to clarify something. You talk about the revolution to overthrow the ruling crowds,
The bourgeoisie.
bourgeoisie. So when you overthrow them, who's going to make the decision?
Everybody.
Everyone.
What you have here is a society that is divided in classes. And the determining factor in that division is who produces things and who benefits from the value that is produced. The employer, the bourgeoisie, the boss, any way you want to take it, benefits from the labor of others. That is, he rakes off the surplus value that's produced. The worker generally gets only what he needs to come back and do the same thing tomorrow, but he produces much more than that, especially with modern technology.
Yeah, well, let's not get off the subject now. You say everyone will make the decisions, but now you don't really think that everyone will agree on every decision.
Well, it doesn't matter as long as everybody agrees, and they will, to abide by the decision of the majority.
Everyone will agree on every decision to be made, right?
I didn't say that. I said everyone will. Well, in the first place, the reason I was going into the economic relationships was that as long as you have a class that benefit from the work of others, they have a special interest in their own right, as separate and apart from everybody else. But if you put an end to the production of commodities, that is production for profit, for for sale rather than for use, then you put an end to a class that has an interest separate and apart from everybody else. The tendency under those conditions is for everybody to have disagreements over administrative questions, technical questions, but not the distribution of wealth. Because the object then is for everybody to work together to produce as much as possible to make them all work less and have a better time in life, if you see what I mean.
Well, now let's think about this now. If I'm really working hard to carry my weight and to support this workers' party, whatever, but I see Joe sitting over here, he's slacking just a little bit.
Joe might not slack if he sees that he benefits. You see, what you're doing is you're taking a snapshot of
Our
today.
welfare system, these people benefit,
You're
the more
taking-
they get, the less they do.
You're taking a snapshot of what exists
that-
today.
Just because he's benefiting is going to make him work harder.
Yeah, but you're taking...
It has the opposite effect. The more they get, the slower they get.
Well, then you have to explain 3 million years of human history, where people lived in communal societies and they all did what had to be done. Yes?
You can't,
I mean, I'll always throw the empirical data at you.
you can't turn the country into a big commune. It won't work.
The world was once a big commune, wasn't it?
I don't know that.
Well, then you need to do some studying because...
You agree with that is what I mean. But when I say I don't know that,
You excuse me?
that I don't agree with that is what I mean.
You don't agree. Well,
I know that.
whether or not you agree is not the point. The question is, what was the actuality?
Precisely. Whether or not you agree with me is the point. The actuality is, without the profit motive, there's no reason for me to work harder than Joe.
But there was once a society in which there was no profit motive.
But you're not talking about living, you're talking about existing.
I'm talking about mankind at one stage of his development.
Who owns nothing, who lives in a commune, they go out and get him a deer and split it.
I'm talking about a society in which there was no profit motive. There was no profit motive because there was no way an individual could benefit from the labor of others and not labor himself.
But what was
Now you have development, through various stages of society. Do you think this is the end of it?
what is the quality of life in countries with no profit motive, though?
I'll tell you, there were areas of the world, and there still are areas of the world.
I'm talking about going back past what we consider our normal civilization. Go way on back.
I'm trying to tell you,
Okay.
there are still areas of the world, very few, and there are very few of these groups left, where people live in communal societies, and within a certain context, that is a context in which they know nothing about medicine, they know nothing about dealing with some of the problems they have from nature around them, they live a perfectly idyllic life.
Yeah, their teeth fall out, they die of
Well,
old
that's
age.
true, but they're not aware of the fact that they exist in a world where all of those things don't have to happen, so they accept them as the normal development and
So
progress of their
ignorance
life.
is key.
Excuse me?
So ignorance is the key to happiness.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that in their ignorance of our further development as a species, they live what is for them, subjectively, an idyllic existence. And you have to understand that. Doesn't mean that everybody should be left that way, that we should go back that way. And there are people in this city, I've had one of these people on the show, a man that has been here and calls in often. Harvey will recognize himself if he's listening, who says that we need to go back to agriculture. Well, you and I are not going back to digging in a field. The problem is that it's the profit motive that drives this contradiction that sets us into the kinds of problems we have in the society.
Is the reason you and I
Necessity
don't
will get rid of it.
to the field.
Excuse me?
Is the profit motive is the reason that you and I don't personally have to go into the field.
No, as a matter of fact, the profit motive is why the means to create our own existence no longer exists. We don't even get a choice as to whether we're going to go into the fields.
Sure.
We have no choice. I'm not talking about you and I individually. I'm talking about you and I as the mass, as the large group of the working class. We don't have any choice. Just as the Irish peasant driven off his land back at the beginning of capitalism didn't have any choice. He was driven into the cities. His land was robbed from him one way or another, forced into the cities where the only choice he had was to work in the beginnings of the capitalist and industrial society.
Did he own that land?
Some of them owned the land, some of them held it by ancient feudal rights, so on and so forth. But they were driven off the land a land which traditionally they had had in order to make their own existence, and driven into the cities where they had no choice. You don't, you know, you can read what's his name? It's gone out of my head. You can read the stuff written in the period by some of the folks that understood what was going on around them, and you can see the process going on. There are people that wrote about this from that period that understood perfectly.
I'll give you one thing. On paper, communism was good. But when you try to put it into practice, there's this little thing that gets in the way called human nature.
You mean human nature has always been the same?
Well, sure.
Well, then you have to explain 3 million years.
3 million?
Yeah, you have to explain the communal societies, some of which still exist in little pockets here and there. You have to explain them if greed is the nature of a human being.
What kind of quality do they have to their life, though, is what I'm getting at.
Now you're sliding away from your point, you see. And you must. The problem here is that mankind's nature is whatever it needs to be in order to continue to exist. And therefore, when this capitalist society, and capitalism as an economic system gave us tremendous technological development. There's no argument with that. Nobody can say that up to a point capitalism wasn't progressive, no matter what the horrors were of capitalism, even at the beginning.
Well, it still is.
I beg your pardon.
Have to put,
You looked around the world lately?
you have to put forth the effort to succeed.
You are again utilizing the manner of thought you've been taught so well in this society, and that is as an individual. Look around the world, pay attention to what's being said by the environmentalists and all these other people, and you will discover very rapidly that you can get very, very worried about the fact that in a few hundred years we may not have a planet to live on.
What other species of creature cleans up its own messes?
Oh, do we? Isn't that precisely what upsets all of these environmentalists?
Well,
That the human being doesn't clean up its messes. Don't you get upset
when a bird craps out there in the park, does that bird clean it up?
It's cleaned up by other creatures out there?
Well,
Don't you get upset when you read about an oil spill and thousands of birds and sea creatures and other things dying because of that oil spill? Doesn't that upset you?
Unfortunate, but
It's unfortunate, but
Man-
that's not cleaning up the mess, is it?
man got up there and cleaned it up. Accidents will happen.
Accidents. You don't really follow this stuff. It's getting worse, I hate to tell you.
Come on, you're living a pipe dream.
I don't live in a pipe dream. Now we're talking about factual data. You go talk to the environmentalists and see what the situation really is.
There's no way I would want to have to live under a system. Because like I said, you're not going to get everyone to agree on every decision.
I'm
Therefore,
curious.
somebody has to break the tie.
I'm curious once again.
Now-
What do you do for a living?
You're substituting one ruling class for another ruling class that will pop up out of your little revolution.
What you fail to understand is that when you eliminate private property and ownership of the means of production, you eliminate classes. There's only one class, and that's all of humanity.
Ownership. Well, if you eliminate any possibility of owning anything, I'm sure that would pretty much take the profit incentive out of everything, because if I can't buy anything, what do I need profit for? If I don't need profit, why should I work?
Profit is the labor that's ripped off from every man that works. What do you do for a living?
I'm an air conditioning contractor.
You're an air conditioning contractor. You're in the middle, yeah. You speak that way.
In the middle.
It's amazing. It's amazing how well, as a general rule, class position in society, that is, your economic position in society, conditions the way you speak. That is what your ideas are.
No,
There are lots of people like you
it's what has put me into my economic place, if you want to.
Excuse me? What?
My willingness to get out there and work my tail off.
There's a lot of folks that work for you or with you that don't ever get that opportunity. How'd you get yours?
There are a lot of people who have worked a lot harder than I have and have not done as well. By the same token, there are people out there who have not worked nearly as hard
That's right. And how does that happen?
than I have.
And how does it happen that way?
Work, and you do what you can do, and you be satisfied with what you can do.
Horatio Alger.
Get by what you do.
Horatio Alger.
envy other people because they have more than you do.
That's the church talking.
You do have.
That's the church talking.
Got it that you got it through your own hard work, and you're not sapping off of somebody else's work, right? Now, if I get
But
more
you
work
do.
to do,
But you do, in
me a
fact.
couple of guys
You do, in fact, don't you?
wage, and they will work for me.
But when they do that, you will be sucking off them, won't you?
No,
No?
they're perfectly free to go
Where
do
does
the
your
work on their
profit?
own.
Oh, but where does your profit come from?
Where does my profit?
Come from in that kind of a situation.
I go out and bid a job.
But where does your profit come from when you've done the job?
That's the money left over after I pay all my expenses.
And your expenses, part of them are what?
Expenses are equipment, not to mention the taxes and permit fees, and any labor I hire.
Right. And the labor gets paid what for their time?
Whatever we agree on.
But what does that represent usually? Do you have any idea what that means? What that represents?
It's what they're willing to work for.
Well, but there's a factor there that makes them compete with other workers, and they usually work whether you know it or not.
Against other contractors.
No, I understand, but they usually work.
Price is down to where we can afford what I'm trying to sell.
That's right. That means that they usually work, and this is a general rule which you can check economically. You can check the data. They usually work for no more than it takes to come back and do the same thing tomorrow.
Not necessarily.
They produce more than that in value, though, don't they?
I started my career working for another man.
I understand.
I was willing to put forth the extra effort.
Alan, that looks awful. I understand what you're saying, but the fact is that this, that you make a profit, and you take a surplus from those people who work for you. Alan, knock it off.
Those people are generally, Ross, I'd say always, people who don't know quite as much about it as I do.
And so you're justified in ripping them off for their labor, right?
They're working, I'm paying them, and
You're paying them less than they produce.
so they are learning.
I see.
See, as I'm drawing a paycheck and I'm
And
learning
that's the
trade.
justification for ripping them off for what they produce, a part of what they
They
produce.
get tired of being ripped off, as you like to put it. They can go out on their own,
Or they can unionize you.
ask me completely, and just make their own money.
Or they can unionize you.
Then I'll be competing directly with them.
They can unionize you.
Union is just a cop-out.
Is it?
There was a day,
Is that why the South has such terrible wages compared to the Union
there
North?
was a day when capitalism has a downside. Now, people can take it to the extreme.
Well, perhaps capitalism also has an end.
Mistreated, abused, misused.
Perhaps capitalism also has an end.
The union was a necessary evil.
A necessary evil.
Necessary evil.
It was a necessity to be true.
But today they're less necessary. But
Well, let me get it another way. Does capitalism have an end, or is that the be-all and end-all and the best thing that it will ever be?
if it were to get too weak, I'm sure we'd see a return to that misuse and abuse that you like to point out, how mean old capitalists rip everybody off.
You're looking at it every day.
Out there, don't let them get too strong to ruin the country. Don't let them be squashed completely. So you
Well.
come out there to keep a lot of people straight.
We're not getting any further. Let's let this discussion go.
I'll let you go back to some of your crank calls. I kind of enjoy those too.
Well, I don't enjoy them, but one has to live with them as long as his line is accessible to anybody, right?
Good talking to you.
Good talking to you. Thank you. Well, we don't mind hearing from the capitalists or those who would be capitalists every now and then. Yes, go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, Jack. I called you last week, and I'm real sorry I couldn't make it to your meeting at Ponce de Leon.
That's okay.
Um,
Let me thank you for that. Let me announce the next one, which is not this Saturday, but the following Saturday. That is 1 week from Saturday.
same,
Again at 10 o'clock at the same place, Ponce de
Okay.
Leon.
and again, I have some more questions for you.
Yeah, I want you, by the way, to get my phone number down. Do you have that number? 627-1887?
Yeah, I see. Oh,
Okay, go ahead, but give me a call off the line later, or tomorrow, or whatever.
okay.
Go ahead. What are your questions?
All right. My first question is, do you think that we should keep letting Haitians in? I mean, we let a lot of Europeans in, but don't you think that we should let Haitians in also?
Should let anybody in.
Well,
Everybody. These are all working people trying to live a better life. The problem isn't that we have immigration from other countries. The problem is that the United States and the Western imperialists have raped all these countries, hold back technology, don't give them the opportunity to develop on their own, because then they wouldn't make a profit, of course, and therefore all of these people are trying to come to those countries that are advertised as wonderful places to live. Of course, that's only a snapshot. They're not such wonderful places to live, I suspect, as you and I may know. I mean, you can hear Russian emigres, if you go talk to Russian emigres, who will say, well, yeah, I can say whatever I want here, but I'll tell you, back in Russia, I had guaranteed health care. I always had a place to live, whether I had money or not, so on and so forth.
Well, you're always going to have people complaining whether you like it or not.
Well, not necessarily, not when they can do something about it.
Yeah. But I got a whole bunch of questions, so I'll just move right along for you.
Go ahead.
All right, my other question is, should we have gun control, do you think? I mean, look at Canada. They only had like 20 killings involving guns last year. And look at us. Already we got over 10,000.
Do you know why we have guns?
Why?
This is a country founded in a revolution.
But why is it?
It's written into the Constitution.
But do you think we should have gun control?
The guarantee to have arms for a revolution is written into the Constitution. Who's we? You see, we live in a society that's divided. The people that want to put an end to weapons in society, the people that are worried that society might erupt in their faces.
Well, yeah. And after hearing this thing with Dowie about this principle and interracial dating at this prom, do you think he was right on this?
Do you think he was right?
No. Do you?
It's a silly question, isn't it?
Okay, and I was asking, do you think that homosexuals get treated fairly in this day and age?
I don't know what all the big deal is. Why should anybody care about what anybody does in their own private lives?
Thank you.
What is all this stuff?
And my last question for you is, in Atlanta public schools, do you think that we invest enough money in science and math? I mean, in terms
I think the Atlanta public schools are one of the biggest lies that ever existed. First of all, segregation is alive and well in the Atlanta public schools. After all, they're predominantly black, therefore they're a terrible school system. Before it was separate, it was separate, segregationist, and you know how that went.
Yeah.
One quick example. They've just turned WABE and the TV channel over to some stupid private organization. They should have taken that channel and put students to work in it, taught them to be engineers, taught them to be producers, taught them to be all the things that you learn. Turned those channels and the radio station into a learning facility. Kept up the same kind of programming with the classical music and all the rest of this stuff, but put students into those places. Let the engineers who have licenses teach them and get them licenses. And use a facility like that in an educational way. Instead, they're turning it over to somebody who's going to make a killing off it. That's the Atlanta public school system.
Well, government would always waste money. But another question about
Well,
this.
we're on the way out. As you can see if you're looking at your set.
Yeah.
Give me a call at home. You got the number?
627-1887, right?
Right. And we'll look for you a week from Saturday, okay?
Okay, thank you then.
Right, thank you. Bye-bye. You're out of your mind. It's too late. Show's over.